The woods were eerily quiet, save for the sound of a baby's soft, desperate cries. It wasn't the kind of sound you'd expect to hear in a forest deep enough to be miles away from civilization. But there, hidden beneath the thick canopy of trees, a young girl stood frozen, staring at the small, helpless infant lying abandoned in the underbrush. She was only 12, yet something inside her told her this wasn't just a chance encounter. This was a moment she couldn't walk away from. With trembling hands, she scooped up the baby, her heart racing. What had led this infant into the woods alone? Who would leave a child like this, vulnerable and alone? She didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing for certain: she couldn't leave him there to die. So, with no one to help her, she took him home, to the secret place she'd made her own, far from the eyes of the world. Over the years, she raised him as her own, keeping him hidden from prying eyes. They lived in a quiet, isolated part of the world, just her and the boy. But there was an unspoken bond between them, a connection that ran deeper than anything she could explain. As the years went by, she taught him everything she knew: language, survival, and kindness. She loved him as if he were her own flesh and blood, and he loved her in return. But, all along, there was something off. Something she couldn't quite place. Time passed, and the boy grew up, becoming a young man with a presence that felt more intense than anyone could understand. As much as she wanted to shield him from the world, she couldn't escape the truth: one day, he would have to face the world beyond their secluded life. But as fate often works, things were about to take a turn that neither of them could have anticipated. It was a cold night when it happened. The girl, now in her early 20s, was walking home when she was suddenly grabbed. A stranger's hand clamped over her mouth, pulling her into the darkness. Panic surged through her body as she struggled, but it was no use. She was trapped. The last thing she remembered was the cold steel of metal against her skin, and then everything went black. When she awoke, she was in a dimly lit room, her arms bound tightly to a chair. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. How did she get here? Why was she here? And who had taken her? Before she could even process her fear, she heard the unmistakable sound of a door creaking open. Footsteps. Slow. Calculated. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up as a chill ran down her spine. Let her go. The voice was cold, yet oddly familiar. It sent a shockwave through her body, but she couldn't place it. She tried to focus, straining to make sense of the words. When her eyes fell on the figure stepping into the dim light, her breath caught in her throat. It was him. The boy. The baby she had found all those years ago. But he was no longer the innocent child she had raised. The young man before her was different. Harder. Darker. The strength in his eyes was terrifying, yet there was something unmistakable about the way he looked at her. Recognition. She wanted to speak, to ask what he was doing here, to demand answers. But the words wouldn't come. She was paralyzed, caught in a storm of emotions. How had he found her? How had he become like this? But what truly took her by surprise was the first word he spoke. Lily. Her heart stopped. The word hung in the air like a haunting memory. It was the first word she had ever taught him. A word she had whispered to him every night as he drifted off to sleep. A word that only she had ever used. Lily, he repeated, this time softer, but with a sense of familiarity that sent shivers down her spine. She looked at him, her mind racing. How did he know her name? And why did he call her by that word like it held the weight of their entire past? The man who had once been the helpless baby she had found in the woods was now standing before her, a stranger in so many ways. And yet, in that single word, there was a world of memories, of love, and of something much darker. She had no idea who he had become, what he had done, or why he was here. But in the deepest part of her heart, she knew that the boy she had raised had come back to her for a reason. And that reason was more dangerous than anything she could ever have imagined. But just as quickly as he had appeared, he was gone, leaving her alone in the dark room with more questions than answers. Who was he now? And what had he become? The pieces of their past were scattered, but one thing was clear: the future would be a dangerous game. A game of secrets, of destiny, and of hidden identities that neither of them could escape. Lily sat in the chair, her mind whirling. She couldn't move, couldn't think straight. The room felt suffocating, the shadows pressing in around her like a storm waiting to break. The only thing she could focus on was the name he had said, her name. She hadn't heard it spoken like that in years. Not since he had been a child. But what kind of man had he become? The boy she had raised, the one she had cared for with every fiber of her being, was standing before her now, cold and distant. It was as if he were a stranger, a version of him she could never have imagined. She didn't know whether to feel relief or terror. Her heart raced, and her breath hitched as she replayed the events leading up to this moment. She had raised him in secret, away from the world. No one knew about him, not even the small town where she had lived her whole life. For years, it was just the two of them, hidden from everything. The day she found him, alone and abandoned, was a day she would never forget. He had been a tiny, fragile baby, no more than a few days old, crying in the woods as though calling out for help. She hadn't been able to leave him there, even though she knew it could be dangerous. The woods had been quiet, too quiet, and the air had been thick with an unease she couldn't explain. After taking him home, she'd done everything she could to protect him. She raised him with love, kept him safe, and taught him to survive in ways that felt normal to her, but now seemed almost primitive. The isolation, the way they lived, was something neither of them had questioned. But as the years passed, she began to wonder if it had all been a mistake, whether keeping him hidden away from the world had only made things worse. She had never seen his birth certificate, never heard the full story of where he had come from. Only the vague sense that something had been very wrong from the start. And now, here he was. The man who had once been a helpless child was staring at her with eyes that held no warmth, no recognition. The boy who had been so grateful for her love, so innocent in his trust, was gone. In his place stood someone who seemed like a different person entirely. His eyes were cold, calculating, and distant. Yet, there was still something about him, something familiar in the way he held himself, in the slight curve of his lips, in the way he moved. It was him. It was always him. But who had he become? The silence in the room stretched on, broken only by the faint sound of her breathing. She couldn't ask him what had happened, couldn't demand an explanation. Not yet. She could barely comprehend what was happening, let alone figure out how to escape. Why did you leave?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why didn't you tell me where you were going? Why didn't you come back?" The young man's gaze flickered, his jaw tightening. It was as if her question had touched a nerve. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he took a few steps closer, his presence making her feel even more trapped. It was as if the walls were closing in. "You wouldn't understand," he said quietly. His voice was calm, emotionless. "There are things you don't know. Things you weren't meant to know." Lily's heart skipped a beat. She didn't understand. She didn't understand any of it. She had spent years trying to protect him, to keep him safe, and now he was standing in front of her, a stranger with answers she desperately needed. But he wasn't the only one with secrets. She had her own questions, questions that had haunted her for years. Why had he been abandoned in the woods in the first place? Who had left him there, and why? And why had he never told her the truth? She had always assumed that he had no family, that he had no past. But the look in his eyes told her otherwise. "What happened to you?" she asked again, her voice trembling. "What did you become? What are you hiding?" He didn't flinch at her words. Instead, he stepped even closer, his face now inches from hers. He leaned in, his lips just barely brushing her ear as he whispered, "You weren't supposed to be part of this. You were never meant to know." The words sent a shiver down her spine, a cold feeling creeping into her bones. She couldn't make sense of it. She had loved him like a son. She had protected him with everything she had. But now it felt as though all of that was unraveling, like a thread being pulled from the fabric of her life. She had no idea what she had raised, what he had become. The boy who had been crying in the woods was long gone, and in his place was someone she couldn't recognize. For a moment, their eyes locked, and she saw something flicker in his, something raw, something desperate. But it was gone just as quickly as it had come. "Why now?" she asked, her voice shaking with fear. "Why are you here? What do you want from me?" His lips curled into a faint smile, but it was cold, almost cruel. "I came to protect you." The words hung in the air, and Lily's mind reeled. He was here to protect her? But from what? Before she could respond, the door to the room slammed open, and another figure stepped inside. The tension in the air ratcheted up a notch, and Lily's heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't see their face, but she could feel the shift in the atmosphere, the new weight in the room. She had no idea who this new person was, but she could sense the danger in their presence. And suddenly, the room felt even smaller, the walls pressing in around her, as if there was nowhere to hide from the secrets that were slowly, terrifyingly, coming to the surface. The figure in the doorway was tall, dressed in dark clothes that seemed to absorb the dim light around him. He didn't speak at first, but Lily could feel his eyes locked on her, like he was studying her every move. The young man, the one she had once called her son, stepped slightly in front of her, his body shifting just enough to block the stranger's view. "You said she wouldn't be harmed," the young man muttered, his voice colder than before, like it was laced with warning. "I said she'd be untouched," the man replied, stepping closer. His voice was smooth, but it held something sharp underneath, like a knife hidden in a smile. "But that was before you started making choices on your own." Lily's heart thundered in her chest. She didn't understand what was happening, what she was caught in, but she could tell it was far bigger than just a kidnapping. There was something going on beneath the surface, something dark, calculated, and planned. And somehow, she was at the center of it. "I'm not leaving her here," the young man said. "You know who she is. You know what she did for me. If you touch her, you'll answer to me." That struck something deep in Lily. His tone wasn't just protective, it was personal. Fierce. Like she still meant something to him, even after all this time, even after whatever he had become. The older man scoffed, shaking his head. "You think that matters now? You think the past gives you power over the future? That woman made a mistake 20 years ago. She interfered with something she never should have touched." Lily's eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" she asked, forcing her voice to steady despite the fear wrapping around her throat. "I found a baby alone in the woods. That wasn't a mistake. That was saving a life." The man looked at her then, for the first time really seeing her. His expression changed, just for a second. Something in his eyes flickered, like a crack in a mask. But it was gone before she could make sense of it. "You didn't save a life," he said flatly. "You interrupted something. You took what wasn't meant for you." Lily shook her head. "He was a child. Alone. Crying. I couldn't just walk away." "That child wasn't abandoned," the man replied. "He was hidden. Protected. And you brought him back into the light." The room seemed to tilt, the weight of the words crashing down around her. Hidden? Protected? From what? Or from who? The young man, her boy, even if she didn't recognize who he was now, was silent. His jaw was clenched, his body tight with tension. He wasn't looking at either of them. He was staring at the floor, like there was something he didn't want to say. "Tell me the truth," Lily said quietly, her voice barely audible over the pounding in her ears. "Who are you really? And what happened after you left me?" He looked up, and for a moment, she saw the boy she remembered, the quiet, thoughtful child who used to ask her about the stars and why leaves changed color in the fall. "I didn't leave you," he said finally. "They took me. They found me. And they told me what I was." "What you were," she repeated. I wasn't supposed to grow up like that. Quiet. Hidden. Loved. His voice faltered on that last word. I was meant to be used. Shaped. Controlled. Lily felt like she couldn't breathe. Used for what? The older man spoke before he could answer. He was born for a purpose. Created, not conceived. The woods weren't just a place someone left him, they were the border between our world and something else. Lily stared at him, the words not quite making sense, but the feeling behind them was unmistakable. Something dangerous had been buried in the past, and it was coming back now, fast and unstoppable. The young man turned toward her again, his eyes darker than ever. I remembered you. I always remembered you. Even when they tried to erase you. I held on to your voice. That name. Lily. It kept me human. Tears pricked the corners of her eyes. There were too many questions, and not enough answers. But one thing was clear, he hadn't forgotten her. No matter what he had been turned into. Then the door creaked open again, and a woman stepped in this time. Her presence changed everything. She was older, severe, dressed like someone who belonged in a room full of secrets. Her gaze moved past the two men and locked onto Lily. So this is her, she said, almost to herself. The girl who disrupted the program. Lily swallowed. What program? The woman smiled faintly. The one that was never supposed to see daylight. She walked closer, each step deliberate. You were just a kid, playing hero in the woods. You didn't know you were taking something that was never meant to be raised with love. He was meant for destruction. War. You turned him into something else. You changed the experiment. Lily stared at her, unable to speak. The boy she had loved, he wasn't just part of something secret. He was the secret. And now, they had come back for him. But she also knew something else, something stronger than fear or confusion. She knew he had come back for her, too. Even if the war was just beginning. The woman's words echoed in Lily's mind like a hammer striking glass. You changed the experiment. That sentence clung to her like frost, numbing her thoughts. She looked at the young man, at the boy she had once rocked to sleep during thunderstorms, and for the first time, truly understood why he felt like a stranger. He wasn't just stolen from her. He had been rebuilt. He stood perfectly still, but his muscles were coiled, tight like a spring. His eyes stayed on the woman who had just entered, but Lily could see something else, restraint. He was holding something back. Not out of fear. Out of control. Like he knew exactly what he was capable of, and how dangerous that was. You don't have to do this, Lily said, her voice soft but steady. She wasn't speaking to the woman anymore. She was speaking to him. You're not who they say you are. You're who you chose to be. You came back for me. The woman scoffed. Don't flatter yourself, Lily. He didn't come back for you. He was programmed to return. It's part of his cycle. When the time comes, they always go back to the imprint. You were a variable in his creation, nothing more. No, Lily whispered, shaking her head. That's not true. He called me by my name. He remembered the word I taught him. He wasn't programmed to love me. That was real. Silence fell across the room. For a second, it felt like the air stopped moving. The young man finally turned his head, slowly, looking at her. There was something burning behind his eyes. Pain. Conflict. But also, connection. That bond, no matter how buried, was still there. Alive. Stop talking to her, the woman snapped. We need to extract him now. If you delay, his emotional contamination will spiral. He's unstable. He didn't move. I said, she began, but he held up his hand, and she froze. The air around them seemed to shift. It wasn't something you could see, but Lily felt it in her bones. A pressure. Like something deep under the surface was pushing its way up. "Is that what I am to you?" he said quietly, not looking at the woman, not looking at anyone. "Unstable? A broken project?" "You're effective," she replied. "And dangerous. That's all that matters." Lily felt it before she saw it. The tension in him turned into something else, energy. He wasn't just holding back emotions anymore. He was holding back power. And whatever they had done to him, whatever they had created, it hadn't taken his heart. Not completely. The woman reached into her coat slowly, carefully, as if expecting him to snap. Her fingers curled around something, Lily couldn't see what, but the thread in the room sharpened instantly. "She'll die if you don't comply," the woman said flatly. He didn't blink. "That's not a guess. It's a promise," she continued. "We don't need her alive. She was never part of the directive." Lily felt her breath catch. But she didn't flinch. She stood up straighter, even though her knees trembled. "If you're going to kill me," she said, "do it. But don't lie about why. You're scared of him. That's why you brought me here. You thought you could use me to keep control." The woman's face twitched. For the first time, she looked uncertain. Lily kept going. "But he's not yours anymore. You turned him into something, yes. But you didn't make his soul. You didn't raise him. You didn't teach him how to love. I did." The tension cracked like thunder. The young man moved before anyone could speak, faster than Lily could track, like a shadow splitting from the walls. He grabbed the woman's wrist, wrenching it back before the device in her hand could activate. She cried out as it dropped to the ground with a metallic thud, blinking red. The other man stepped forward, ready to intervene, but froze mid-step. The young man had shifted again, his stance wider, expression blank. The air grew hotter, then colder, like the atmosphere itself was reacting to him. "I didn't want this," he said, his voice hollow. "But if you hurt her, I will tear it all down." "You don't know what you're saying," the woman said through clenched teeth. "You'll expose everything. The others will come for you. Let them." Lily stood completely still, her eyes locked on him. She didn't know what would happen next, only that the moment they were standing in was the edge of something irreversible. A war, a revelation, a truth they could never unsee. The red device still blinked at their feet, like a countdown ticking quietly in the dark. "What happens if that goes off?" Lily asked, her voice low. The young man didn't answer. But the fear in the woman's face did. The man near the door pulled out a phone, muttering into it urgently. She couldn't hear what he said, but whatever it was triggered a response outside the building. She heard footsteps, many of them, rushing toward the room. Heavy boots, radio chatter, the unmistakable rhythm of a tactical unit moving in. They were being surrounded. Lily's heartbeat pounded in her ears, louder than everything. She turned toward the young man. "Whatever you are," she whispered, "I'm still not afraid of you." He didn't speak. He only looked at her, as if trying to hold that sentence inside him like a lifeline. Then the lights cut out. Total darkness swallowed them. And from somewhere outside the door came a voice Lily didn't recognize. Calm. Mechanical. But unmistakably human. "Target has broken protocol. Execute Phase 2. She didn't know what Phase 2 meant. She didn't want to. But she knew, deep in her chest, that whatever was coming next, none of them were ready for it. The room stayed pitch black for several seconds, and in that silence, every sound was amplified, the creak of boots outside the door, the low mechanical hum of the blinking device on the floor, and the quiet, uneven rhythm of Lily's breathing. Her heart pounded against her ribs like it was trying to warn her before her mind could catch up. Then, a strange light flickered above them, soft, bluish-white, and not from the ceiling. It came from him. The young man's hands were glowing faintly, veins along his arms illuminated like tiny rivers of energy. He hadn't moved since the lights went out, but something was changing in him. Not just physically. Something deeper. Something unleashed. Lily stared, frozen, 1,000 questions screaming at once. But before she could speak, the steel door burst open with a bang. A dozen figures stormed in, tactical gear, black visors, weapons drawn. They moved in perfect sync, like they'd rehearsed this moment down to the second. But what stopped Lily cold wasn't their weapons. It was the fact that none of them were looking at her. They were looking at the woman. She spun toward them, confusion flaring in her eyes. "What is this?" she barked. "Stand down." One of the men lifted his visor. His expression was blank. Unreadable. "You've been compromised. You're no longer in control of the subject." "I made the subject," she growled. "And now," he said calmly, "you're his liability." The woman reached for her coat pocket again, but this time, she didn't make it. A sharp electric pulse filled the air, and she collapsed to the ground, twitching once before going still. Lily stumbled back in shock. "Wait. I thought they worked for her." "So did she," the young man said quietly. His glow was fading now, his hands steady. But his voice carried something darker than before. "She wasn't the only one watching me." One of the masked figures turned to him. "We received your signal. It's time." "I didn't send it," he replied. The man paused. "Then who did?" And that's when the second twist hit like a sudden storm. A faint voice crackled from the small red device still blinking on the floor. Not a warning. Not a command. A child's voice. Soft. Fragile. Familiar. "Mommy, help me." Lily's blood turned to ice. She knew that voice. She'd heard it 20 years ago, echoing through the trees. The night she found the baby in the woods. She dropped to her knees, staring at the device. "That's not possible," she whispered. "That's his voice, when he was a baby. How is that recording even real?" The young man looked shaken now, his hands curling into fists. "They lied to both of us," he muttered. "They made me believe I was the only one. But I was never the first." The man in tactical gear stepped forward, slowly. "You weren't. There were others. Failed iterations. Rejected outcomes. You were the first one that survived and adapted. But you weren't the beginning. She was." He pointed at Lily. Everyone froze. "What?" she breathed. "You weren't just a girl who stumbled into something," the man continued. "You were born into it. Your memory, it was altered. The first child, he wasn't abandoned. He was sent to you. Because your DNA matched a dormant sequence we couldn't replicate in the lab. The boy needed you to evolve." Lily shook her head. No. No, I was just a girl in the woods. I had a normal life." "You think you did. But your parents weren't who they said they were. And the woods? That wasn't an accident. It was a perimeter. A place where we watched from afar. You passed every behavioral test without knowing." The young man's voice dropped. "You were part of the program, Lily. Not just by chance. By design. It was too much. Too fast." But something inside her, deep in her chest, wasn't surprised. Like some part of her had always known the pieces didn't quite fit, the random nightmares, the feeling of being watched as a child, the way no one in her town ever spoke about the forest. And now, everything was converging here. The lights flickered back on, flooding the room with harsh white glare. The woman on the floor was gone, her body removed without a sound. The men in black were still, waiting for orders. But from who? The red device blinked again. "Mommy," the voice repeated. "They're hurting me." Lily's eyes snapped to the young man. "That's not me," he said quietly. "It's someone else. Another child. Still out there." The air crackled. A new layer of fear settled in Lily's chest. If there was another child, still in captivity, still being used, then this wasn't the end of the nightmare. It was just beginning. And for the first time, Lily realized this wasn't just about her anymore. Or the boy she raised. It was about all the children who had never made it out of the woods. The past wasn't behind her. It was waiting. Lily stood there, her knees weak, as the child's voice echoed one final time from the red device. "Mommy, it's dark in here." Something inside her broke. It wasn't just sorrow, it was rage. Not the kind that burned recklessly, but the kind that had waited years, maybe decades, for a truth she never knew she was searching for. She looked at the young man, and he looked back, like the final piece had clicked into place between them. He wasn't just the boy she saved, he was the only family she had left. And somewhere out there, another child, another life, was waiting to be rescued. "We have to go," she said firmly, turning to the man in tactical gear. "Where is the facility?" The man didn't answer right away. He hesitated, then lifted his hand and tapped a device on his wrist. A small holographic map projected midair, dense forest, underground grids, and one blinking red dot in the center. They moved the site 6 years ago. But it's still in the valley. You'll never reach it alone. "I'm not alone," she said, glancing at the young man beside her. "Not anymore." The teen didn't argue. Orders had changed. Everything about this operation had changed. And the boy, no, the man he had become, was no longer a subject. He was something else entirely. Something they couldn't control. They moved fast. Through woods that felt more like a memory than a place. The leaves rustled like whispers. Lily recognized none of the paths, yet her feet moved as if they remembered. Every twist, every turn brought her closer to the source, not just of the child's voice, but of everything that had ever gone wrong in her life. It all started here. And it would end here. As they reached the edge of the valley, the earth opened up like a scar. A hidden entrance blinked to life under the roots of a fallen tree, camouflaged tech that only activated under his presence. He stepped forward, placing his palm on the scanner. The doors hissed open with a groan, revealing a cold corridor of metal and flickering lights. Lily hesitated, staring into the dark tunnel ahead. "What if it's a trap?" she asked. He didn't stop walking. "Then we walk into it together." Inside, the facility was quiet, too quiet. Rooms that once buzzed with activity were abandoned, papers scattered across desks, machines still humming faintly. The place hadn't been shut down. It had been evacuated. Suddenly, a voice came from the overhead speakers. Female. But not the woman from before. "You shouldn't have come here, Lily." Lily froze. "Who is that?" "I was the first. The original mother," the voice said calmly. "Before you. Before him. I gave them what they wanted, my child. And when he failed, they came for another. You." A screen in the hallway flickered on. An image of a woman, her face older now, weary but unmistakably familiar, appeared. Lily's breath caught in her throat. She looked like her. Or rather, like someone she could have become. Their features were nearly identical. "You're not my mother," Lily said slowly. "No," the woman said. "But you were created from me." The world seemed to tilt. "I don't understand," Lily said. "You mean I'm not?" "You were born to be the solution," the woman interrupted. "A cleaner genetic slate. A second chance to get the formula right. Your memories, your life, it was all crafted. But something happened. You became too human. You bonded. You loved. That's what ruined everything." Lily felt like her body was floating, detached from her own skin. Everything she knew had unraveled. But she wasn't breaking. Not this time. "And that's what makes me real," she said. "I'm not just a design or a theory. I'm a person. And I came to take the others out." The doors behind them slammed shut. Gas hissed from vents above. Lily started coughing. The young man grabbed her, pulling her into a maintenance corridor he remembered from his training. "This way," he shouted. They ran, past rows of cryopods, past empty labs. Then they saw it, a chamber glowing behind reinforced glass. Inside was a small child, curled up, fast asleep in a pod that looked more like a coffin. "It's her," Lily whispered. He moved to break the glass, but a final warning echoed across the chamber. "If you take her," the voice said, "you destroy everything that made you." "Then let it burn," he growled. He smashed the glass, pulling the child gently from the pod. Alarms blared. Lights burst. The building trembled. They didn't wait. They carried the child out, through fire and collapsing steel, through tunnels lit only by memory. When they burst back into the forest, dawn had broken. The sky was pink, birds stirring, as if the world outside had no idea how close they had come to losing something sacred. Lily cradled the girl against her chest. The child stirred, opened her eyes, and for a moment, Lily saw herself. The same fear. The same hope. The young man turned to her, expression unreadable. "She's like I was." "No," Lily said gently, brushing the girl's hair back. "She'll be better. Because this time, we won't hide the truth." They walked together, disappearing into the forest mist. But just as the screen faded to black, back in the wreckage of the lab, a monitor flickered to life. And on it, a different pod. Still sealed. Inside, a third child. Eyes wide open. And smiling. The sky had turned a golden orange by the time Lily reached the edge of the forest. Her legs ached, her hands were scraped and trembling, but she kept moving, one foot in front of the other. The little girl slept soundly in her arms, her breath warm against Lily's neck. Behind her, the young man walked in silence, his sharp eyes constantly scanning the trees. Even after everything they'd been through, after the fire, the collapse, the lies, there was still more unknown than known. But they were out. They were alive. And that mattered. They reached an old ranger station, long abandoned but sturdy enough to shelter them for the night. The man lit a fire while Lily wrapped the girl in a worn blanket she found tucked behind a cabinet. The quiet crackle of the flames filled the room, blending with the distant hoot of an owl. For the first time in hours, they could breathe. Lily sat beside the young man, watching the girl sleep. "She'll ask one day," Lily said softly. "About who she is. Where she came from. She should know the truth," he replied. "We both should have, from the start." Lily looked at him, really looked. Gone was the frightened boy she had once rocked to sleep, hidden in a blanket beneath her bed. In his place stood a man who had seen more than most, who had survived the unthinkable and still found a way to protect her. "Do you remember that word?" she asked quietly. "The first one I taught you?" He gave a small, tired smile. "Star." She nodded, her throat tightening. "You said it so quietly. You pointed to the sky, and I told you they were stars. You kept saying it. Over and over. Like you knew they were yours." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked at the ceiling, lost in thought. They wanted to make weapons. Programs. Experiments. But what they accidentally created was family. Lily leaned her head on his shoulder. For a long moment, they didn't speak. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been felt. In the following days, they kept moving, further from the valley, deeper into quiet towns that asked no questions. They changed names. They built a small life out of the pieces they had. Lily worked in a library under a new identity. The young man helped repair homes for people who had lost everything in storms or fires. The girl, whose name they chose together, Ella, grew stronger every day. Her laughter filled the rooms like light. But even as life returned to something close to normal, the shadows never fully left them. Sometimes, Lily would wake up at night with a chill on her spine, as if someone was watching. Other times, she'd catch Ella staring at a flickering light or listening closely to distant sounds no one else could hear. Still, they didn't run. Not anymore. Because they understood something now: hiding wasn't the same as healing. And secrets, left buried too long, always found their way to the surface. One day, months later, Lily sat at the edge of a park bench while Ella played nearby. The young man, who now went by Cal, joined her, holding 2 warm cups of coffee. His hair had grown longer, and he had a small scar along his jaw now. A reminder of the last battle they hadn't asked for but had survived anyway. "Have you ever thought," Lily asked, "what would have happened if I hadn't walked into those woods?" He nodded slowly. "Every day." She glanced at him. "Would you still be alive?" "I think I would have existed," he said. "But I don't think I would have lived." She smiled faintly at that. It was true. For all the pain, the confusion, the years lost in lies, there had also been love. Real, quiet, imperfect love. The kind that can't be engineered or forced. The kind that changes people. "I've been writing it all down," Lily said. "Everything. From the beginning." "For who?" he asked. "For her," she said, nodding toward Ella. "So she never has to wonder. So when the time comes, she'll know who she is, and who she's not." The wind picked up, rustling the trees. Cal looked out toward the horizon. "You think it's really over?" he asked. Lily considered the question. Somewhere, deep beneath the ground, there were still remnants of that program: files, frozen labs, maybe even that third pod. The monitor with the smiling child. There was no guarantee someone wouldn't come looking. But this time, they were ready. "It's not about it being over," Lily said. "It's about being ready to face it, together. No more running. No more hiding." He looked at her. "Together," he agreed. Ella ran up to them just then, her cheeks flushed and beaming. She handed Lily a daisy, her favorite flower from the garden they had planted. "Look, Mommy," she said proudly. Lily's eyes welled up. She took the flower, her fingers brushing the soft petals. "It's beautiful, baby." Ella turned to Cal. "Will you come push me on the swing?" Cal smiled. "Of course." As they walked back to the playground, Lily stayed behind for a moment, staring up at the sky. The stars were just beginning to show. One blinked brighter than the rest. She smiled to herself. A girl had once found a baby crying in the woods. And now, years later, that same baby had found her again. Not just to save her life, but to give it back. And this time, they were finally free.